Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist.
It's like a superhero. I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist.
I wonder what my costume or uniform would look like.
Oh, yeah. Something with a T on it, maybe.
T for...
therapist or MFT, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe MFT, I guess.
Yeah, like I'm thinking like the S in Superman. So,
I don't know. That's not... It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Okay. So how this works is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. And today's topic is, does your partner have a personality disorder?
Ooh la la.
So we're going to be getting into a lot of that sort of stuff. And before we get into that, if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question. So stay tuned for that. And if you enjoy the podcast and find the information helpful, please subscribe and share it with your friends and family. And if you really enjoy the podcast, please consider leaving a review. It will help feed the machine.
Oh, gosh, that sounds awful.
Yeah.
It will help other people find us.
That's
Other people who need this information. Yeah.
This is what we're going towards as a humanity. Like, feed the machine. Like, let it take us over and survive while we perish.
You do realize people are terrified of AI. So, no, we don't want that.
I like it, though. I like how they're terrified. No, I'm joking. It's fun. It's fun to laugh about, because maybe one day
it'll be the end of our species.
Yeah,
great.
It's kind of funny, though.
You have a sick sense of humor, sir.
Yes, I do. You don't even know. So for today's episode, I thought we can give a general overview of personality disorders, like how prevalent they are, the most common, and then offer tips to navigate a relationship, whether that be something that you are currently in or we're in, just so people kind of have a better understanding of what's going on here. So I guess to start again, maybe just a general, because I know you said almost 20% of the population has a personality disorder.
Yeah, I almost wish we could have worked this into an extended part of the dating conversation we had in our last episode, because it's so much better, as Benjamin Franklin pointed out, to prevent rather than to try to cure a problem. And I think when we're dating, it helps to hold in mind that at least a third of the population is mentally ill at any one time.
A third of the population?
Yeah. So 1 out of every 3 of the, in your case, women you would be dating. If you're dating at random out of the general population, 1 out of 3 is going to be mentally ill.
And same for men, for women.
And men. Yeah, it's absolutely the same for men. So I think it helps to just hold that in mind, because even if you're not a therapist, just to relax with it and to know that, yeah, that's a possibility. And I need to just be on the lookout. Yeah. It's like hiking in the wilderness. You want to stay aware of, the possibility of things could get really bad if you're not paying attention to what's going on.
A mountain lion or a bear jumping out.
Well, yeah, actually, the neighborhood I live in, we had people in my neighborhood have night vision cameras, motion activated cameras, and we've had both bears and mountain lions.
Oh, really?
Walking through the streets down below.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a pretty. You just really want to be aware. And I was thinking of that last night as I was walking around. But with dating, it's the reason why it matters is because things can go very, very wrong. It's very easy, and it has been easy for me to fall in love with people who have mental health challenges. And of course, I've had my own mental health challenges at different periods of my life.
Yeah.
But the idea that, I want to move in with this person who has an ongoing mental illness they don't even acknowledge. No, that doesn't sound like a good idea to any of us. And when we talk about personality disorders, I think I can offer everybody a really quick and helpful tutorial. You don't need to read a lot of books, and you don't really need to do a whole lot of thinking, because you already know so much more than you think you know. There are 10 major personality disorders that therapists routinely identify in treatment. Now, of those 10,
number 1.
No, you don't have to remember any of them.
Okay.
Well, you just got to remember, and hold in mind that you do know what the word personality means. Well, what does it mean? It means a pattern of the way somebody interacts with the world around them. So if I say, well, you'll like her, she's a really cheerful person. And what I mean by that is not that she's cheerful relentlessly 24/7, but that she has a habit, a pattern that pervades the different strata of her life, whether she's at church or at work or with her family, that she is cheerful. And that's how she ends up interacting with the world around her. So the clinical way of my saying all that is when we're talking about a personality, it's a pervasive and enduring pattern of interaction with the world around you. A pervasive, meaning through the different strata of your life, work, home, church, out with friends, and all of that, and enduring over time. He was a cheerful little boy, he was a cheerful teenager, and he's a cheerful adult. And typically, we're all like that. We have these enduring patterns that mark our personality. Now, personality may not seem like a terribly scientific descriptor, but that's partly because we're immersed in personality. We have our own personality. All of the people around us have their own personalities. And we generally, as a species, when we start talking about somebody who's not in the room, we can agree that their personality is, the following. And we all might list, if we all listed 3 to 5 descriptors, there'd be pretty much universal agreement on most of them. So generally, if she's got a cheerful personality, pretty much everybody in her life knows that. There may be 1 or 2 people out there who say, oh no, you don't know her. There's another side to her. But those generally are few and far between. So there's general unanimity of assessment. And when we talk about personalities, it's a normal human tool that we use to interact, because we find some traits like cheerfulness, or on the contrary, cantankerousness. We find those tools helpful, and we return to them again and again. So we have this pattern. Typically, a normal human personality will have hundreds of traits. So I might be cheerful most of the time, but when people are crossing my boundaries and doing things that I find unacceptable, I grow increasingly irritable. Maybe I become more adamant or more confrontational, even angry, perhaps firmer in setting boundaries. And all of those are personality traits. They're resident in my toolbox of traits, but I only bring them out as needed. I don't live with chronic anger in that scenario.
Yeah.
So what about a personality disorder? Well, okay, now that you know what a personality is, you'll know a personality disorder becomes pretty easy to understand. A personality is disordered when the individual is stuck on 1 or 2 traits, a very limited number of traits. So you don't even need to remember that a paranoid personality disorder is a thing. If you can just remember, gosh, anytime somebody is always one way, they're just repetitively the same way over and over and over. They do this all the time. It's like with a paranoid personality disorder, they're always suspicious of people getting over on them, taking advantage of them, tricking them, trying to get something out of them for nothing. And so, paranoid personality disorder. Are there times to be paranoid? Absolutely. Is it a great lifestyle? Absolutely not. Would it be great to be married to a paranoid? No. But they don't usually introduce themselves on dates as paranoids. Okay. Hi, I'm Steve. I'm a paranoid. So you have to actually take the time and trouble to get to know somebody, and it's more than a month or 2. So, you need to take the time to really get to know somebody and start noticing patterns. Like with the alcoholic or the person who's used to abusing alcohol regularly, we see a pattern. And generally, those of us who are not given to alcohol abuse, find the alcoholic not only alarming and highly dramatic, but we also find them boring because they're so repetitious. I mean, really, again with this, and
in what way? Just like drinking?
Yeah, well, they're not only they're drinking, but the things they say when they get drunk, the things they do to go get drunk, the blame they have on the people, places, or things around them for getting drunk, the damage they incur when they are drunk, how they sabotage social events, or it's like it's always with the eye roll. You know, for the kids, even growing up in the alcoholic family, it's eye roll. Dad's drunk again. Mom's drunk again. And it's boring. It's boring because it's always the same. It's so repetitive. And it's the same with people who get stuck in any kind of addictive behavior or compulsive behavior. It's boring. And it would be even more boring if it weren't terrifying. You know, when the alcoholic gets behind the wheel of the family car. And we're all in the car coming down the mountain late at night while they're intoxicated. I've had that experience more than I care to think about.
As a kid?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my mom would. Oh, my goodness. I could tell you stories. So scary. But for the people with personality disorders, and again, they're like 10, at a minimum, at least 10.
Paranoid's one.
Oh, yeah. You want them all.
I kind of want them all. Just it's kind of fun to hear them, and then just to give a general babackground is kind of fun.
It is fun, and it's really interesting. But there's no way in an hour I could go through all of them.
Well, we got one done already, and you set it up so well with explaining the personality and the disorder. I think that explanation was really good. So now I think we could just hit them one by one.
And this is how successful you are at manipulation. You're so good at complimenting me and saying how well I did it. But there's actually another piece of it. And the other piece is they all have an impaired observing ego. And the observing ego is that ability you and I have to take a step outside of ourselves and see what it is that we are doing that is not working for us. So, you know, if I've done the same thing 3 times with the kids or the same thing 3 times with my dogs, at some point, whether it's 3 times or 30 times, at some point the light bulb goes off. I realize, oh crap, this isn't working. I need to do something different. So, and we realize that it's us, not the dog or the kids. You know, it's us and the way we're handling things. And that observing ego is something they lack.
So they're unable to do that.
They're unable to do that. They don't see what they themselves are doing. That creates what? That creates drama. Well, what's drama? Drama is the needless escalation of a problem. So in life, most of us experience problems in a linear fashion. You know, it's almost like a video game where we start at the beginner's level and we go along until there's a problem, and then we solve that problem. And by solving that problem, we get to jump up to the next level of the video game. And we still have problems because life is always going to present us with problems, but they get increasingly complex and they're more challenging because, well, now we don't have any of the old problems because we've matured beyond having those problems. And for example, in grade school, I wanted to be approved of by all the kids in the classroom. And once I figured out, oh, I need to be okay with disapproval from at least some, because there's no way I can have everybody like me. So I don't have that problem anymore. Then you move on to the next level. But for the person, how many
levels are in life?
No, there's a lot. So for the person with the personality disorder, life is not linear. Life is circular because
around them.
It's them going through the same problems over and over again, because it isn't life that's creating those problems or presenting those problems. It is they themselves who are creating those problems. So
this will be interesting once we get into personality disorders, where they are not the problem and they're living their lives perfect and you're the problem.
For the person with the personality disorder
that has that sort of,
they don't see that. They don't see that it's them typically. I mean, and these are not all or nothing disorders. They occur on a continuum. So there are people who are diagnosable, say with having narcissistic personality disorder, where they're preoccupied with their image. And those people can the severity of their case could be mild to moderate to serious to severe. So when we look at somebody, even a narcissist who is mildly narcissistic but still qualifies for the diagnosis, then he's actually a good candidate for maybe going into therapy and getting some help. Whereas somebody with a serious to severe case of narcissism would be utterly disinterested in overcoming their narcissism, even if they admitted to having it, which they probably wouldn't, because why would they want to be like the rest of the cattle in the herd?
Yeah. And for that whole continuum, do all those people at the continuum also have that impaired observing ego? But you're saying the person closer to a more mild state has the ability to recognize it, acknowledge it, and then work through that.
In a mild level, there's a less impairment. There's less of an impairment of the observing ego. So, but that's in fact what typically happens is the individual with a personality disorder blames other people or other events or life circumstances for why they are the way they are. So if you'd been raised the way I was raised, or if you were married to who I was married to, you would be paranoid too, for example. And I think for people to understand that this is a scientific diagnosis and not a moral condemnation is important. Just like with substance abuse, it's not because this person is weak that they're addicted to methamphetamine. It's because all of us can be subject to compulsive or addictive behaviors. And just because I may have a different compulsion, like in my case, my own compulsive behavior, that would be an analog to somebody else's alcoholism, would be my own compulsive workaholism, my criticism of others, and my controlling behaviors, which I've spent years working through, right? So we all are going to have these defects to work on. None of us have a perfectly balanced personality, but I like the idea, if you think about the circularity of the experience of the drama in the person with the personality disorder in their life, it's circular sort of in the same way Buddhists talk about trying to escape the wheel of existence, because it is so boringly repetitive. The same problems over and over. Now, the gift in that for those of us with an observing ego is that the light bulb goes off. We begin to see, and we can start living life more skillfully. Whether we're Buddhist or not, we can actually do better over time. But for the person with the personality disorder, it's always somebody else who's creating that problem, and that makes it really hard. So whether we're married to somebody like that or just dating somebody like that over a period of time, you'll start noticing yourself rolling your eyes, becoming tired of the repetitious, maladaptive behavior. And when you're doing that, for it to occur to you, this could be a personality disorder. I mean, they always seem to be like, say, somebody with borderline personality disorder, where they have a pervasive and enduring fear of abandonment. And I just learned actually from a client who's working through this pervasive and enduring fear of abandonment actually comes from another trait that I've only seen in borderline personality disorder, and that is a deep sense of emptiness. And if you reflect on that and you realize, I've never had a deep sense of emptiness, well, yeah, you're not a borderline. Borderlines do have that. And out of that emptiness, there's this fear of people finding out, because there's really no there. And once they find out that I'm empty inside, of course they're going to want to leave, because I'm all show and no go. I've got nothing inside of me. So
they have no feelings or anything? Like what?
No, they have feelings. Borderlines have terror of abandonment.
Okay. But when they say they're empty inside, what is...
there's just a pervasive feeling of emptiness inside. Like there's no identity. There's no core person. And often they can be somewhat chameleon-like in that because they're trying to get favor from others, they often will give up love in exchange for attention. So as long as you're paying attention to them, that's pretty sweet.
All right.
But even negative attention, sadly, really works for them. So if you're unfortunate enough to be in a romantic relationship with a borderline, and you're starting to figure it out, and you're becoming increasingly annoyed, and you're getting tired of this, don't leave me. I know you don't love me, but don't leave me. Or I hate you. Don't leave me. Or go away. Don't leave me. This repetitious kind of behavior that goes back and forth and is very crazy making until, again, you figure it out and you can move on. And I will say to everybody, a really simple way to get a tutorial on this. There are many books out there on these subjects, but I think, frankly, Wikipedia has a wonderful series of articles on all of the personality disorders. And as you get into them, I mean, it's not a lot of reading. So as you get into them, you can really learn a lot. This is like 19% of the population.
Yeah.
It is one out of every 5 people, essentially. That's a lot of people. And in certain circles, it's going to be a much higher number than that. So, and for some of us who are attracted to certain types, we're going to be running into a lot of personality disorders until we figure out our own inadequacies and our own maladaptive patterns of behavior. Like the men and women who like so-called bad boys or naughty girls, who are kind of the outlaws in our world. Those individuals typically would be antisocial personality disorder. And getting over that, moving on, I think is pretty important because they really lack a sense of honor and they don't keep agreements.
So the antisocial likes the bad boy or the bad girl? No,
the antisocial is the bad boy.
Oh, they are the bad boy or the bad girl. Okay.
Yeah. Now, there are posers out there who like to wear leather jackets and pose as if they were outlaws, but they're really not. They're just enjoying wearing their leather jacket and riding their motorcycle like I do. But they don't, they're really not lawbreakers for somebody with antisocial, a lot of people get confused over that one because they think it means shy or something like that. No, it means the individual standing against society. Social norms for them are irrelevant.
They should call it anti-societal then.
Yeah, maybe so. But they would be, if somebody confronted them about robbing you and you'd been in their life for the last 2 years or as a friend, in your mind as a friend. Well, if he didn't want me to rob him, he shouldn't have been flashing all that cash.
Yeah.
Or leaving his money around.
Seems like a good argument.
Or if he hadn't wanted me to rob him or steal his car, he shouldn't have broken down on the side of the road the way he did.
Yeah.
Because when I helped fix his tire, he thought I was doing it for him.
Yeah.
And then I took his keys and drove off.
Okay.
Leaving him with my junker. So whatever it is, the antisocials are really to be avoided. But frankly, they all are. And again, not more with moral condemnation or moral judgment. These are people who don't need a boyfriend nearly so much as they need a therapist.
Yeah.
They don't need a girlfriend. They need a therapist.
But they're not going to go to a therapist, most of them, correct?
Most of them, because most of them really don't see that they have a problem, right? Because of that observing ego's impairment. So if you have an impaired observing ego, it's kind of hard to tell. Like usually with a depressed person, they'll figure out that they're depressed.
Yeah.
But somebody can be very depressed, and this gets a little bit confusing. Let's say she shows up at the clinic for treatment or the mental health facility for treatment, and she's drunk or she's abusing drugs. Okay, well, yes, of course, she deserves treatment. Then the therapist experiences, oh, she's getting better. That's really good. And there's this wonderful person underneath the veneer. Or and therapists would recommend all the standard interventions for substance abuse. But then you find out, oh no, she's really depressed too. And then you start treating the depression. And the problem there is the depression usually will respond to treatment for a minute, and then it doesn't. And it doesn't because this person is still using it to gain attention. And they're using it to gain attention because they're afraid of being abandoned. And so but even the depression isn't the underlying problem. It's the borderline personality disorder. So an individual could have 3 or more different diagnoses all at the same time quite easily. Yeah. What we call co-occurring or comorbid conditions. And when it comes to personalities, people can have up to 3 different personality disorders all at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's pretty crazy making too. That's why I don't want to get too much into the weeds of the diagnosing.
But what about, so there's also the avoidant personality. That's another one, right?
Sure. And the avoidant is really afraid of, the easy one to remember there is if you can remember the peanut butter Jif, spelled J-I-F.
Oh yeah.
The fear of judgment, looking inadequate, or looking foolish. So they avoid circumstances where any of those can occur, and they avoid typically meeting people because they're afraid of being judged or looking inadequate or looking foolish. And they don't want to meet people unless they're certain of being liked. And they create drama in their lives, not by so much what they do, but by what they fail to do. Because of their disorder, they create an awful lot of isolation in their lives. And isolation brings with it a whole host of mental health problems that can be very serious.
Yeah.
And so they have a number of problems but it seems on the surface like they're perfectly fine people. They just keep to themselves.
Okay.
None of us are really noticing any real mental health problems. They tend to be kind and polite and that sort of thing, and friendly on a superficial level, but not really capable of being friends.
Because they're afraid that judgment, inadequate, foolishness.
Yeah.
That's always kind of the driving force with them.
Yeah. And then the borderlines are often kind of referred to as emotional vampires because they're needy. They're always needing your attention and then screaming at you if you start reading a book because you're not paying attention to me and you don't love me. I know you don't love me. And then, but in comparison to the vampirism of the borderline, which is very serious, a lot of historians think Adolf Hitler was a borderline, but is the histrionic, who's kind of a bloodsucker too, but more on the level of a mosquito because they're just annoying.
Histrionic.
Yeah, they're kind of the person always drawing attention to themselves. In our last podcast, we were talking about men who can't stop talking about themselves.
Okay.
Well, men and women can be histrionics, but generally we think of, we stereotype and think of some of these disorders being more common to men or to women. Narcissists are almost always thought of as being men, but women can be narcissists. Borderlines are almost always thought of as being women, but they're roughly occurring in at the level of 50-50 men and women. But the thing again for the listener is, this is a part of dating. This is a part of love. You need to remember this basic mental health information because it's important to your future safety and your future happiness and the welfare of any children you might have with one of these individuals. So you need to get to know people and to know that they're adaptive and that they can be cheerful and friendly when that's appropriate. And they can be very defensive and standoffish and getting angry appropriately when the time comes for that.
If someone was listening to this and say they were like histrionic and they're like listening and be like, oh, this guy personality disorders, whatever. And then they're like histrionic and it kind of explains them to a T. They recognize that. Would they be like, oh, this idiot, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about?
Well, yeah, that would be.
Or they like come to some Jesus moment And
again, it would depend if it's
if they're on the continuum.
mild, moderate, serious, or severe.
Okay.
It would be really on that continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And if they could see it, it would be appropriate to find the right therapist, because not every therapist is comfortable dealing with personality disorders and helping people with these disorders. There is not, I just want to add, there is not a pill that you can get from your psychiatrist that will make a personality. It requires work, and it usually takes 3 to 5 years of regular therapy.
Oh, that's my question. If there's a pill, I'm always looking for that easy. All right. So say that you are on one of these continuums with one of these. We're on 6 so far. We still have a few more to go, but quick question. If we are on a continuum, would you recommend, if you, at any point, if you're from mild to the most severe, that they should go seek help?
Absolutely.
And that it's going to take at least 3 to 5 years, you're saying?
Yes.
Even the most mild case will take 3 to 5 years.
I'd like to think I could be wrong, because maybe there's somebody who's truly gifted.
Mm-hmm.
But if your case is serious enough to qualify for a diagnosis, that means it's disabling.
Okay.
You are disabled. That's why we hand out diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to label people and stigmatize them.
Yeah.
It's because we want to help them.
Okay.
So developing a personality, can you do that in 1 year? I don't think that's really possible. That's pretty
true.
daunting.
So then another one, I guess, is so we had paranoid, narcissism, borderline, antisocial, avoidant, histrionic.
You're determined to get this out of me, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well,
what else you got?
Well, I'm trying to think of what's in Seinfeld. If you remember that TV comedy,
yeah,
Jerry Seinfeld played a narcissist.
Mm.
And I think, what was the Julia Dreyfus played the borderline, and who was always sure it wasn't going to work out with men. And then there was, Kramer was the schizotypal. And schizotypal personality disorder is, they're sort of to me at least, they seem the very lovable, quirky, kooky ones, because they are eccentric, and that is their primary character trait, is their eccentricity. Mm-hmm. So they have, as with Kramer, you see that kind of goofy way he had of moving his body, and the expressions on his face, and the crazy things he would say or do. And for him, that was just regular everyday life. Mm-hmm. And that's a personality disorder, and it is disabling, as it would be with Kramer and his character in real life. But I've treated all of these disorders. Those particular individuals are actually very sensitive, and I have found them all to be very enjoyable to treat.
All the personality disorders?
Yeah, they're all enjoyable to treat once they get into treatment, because they're human beings who are truly suffering. I mean, that's why they go into treatment. They see at some level what is going wrong, and they want help. So now they don't all want help, and they're not all open, again, because of that impaired observing ego.
Yeah. Now,
a name, I might as well get it out of the way, because the schizotypal sounds like the schizoids, and the schizoids are not the same at all. They are characterized by a profound indifference.
That's another one, schizoids?
Yeah. And it's not schizophrenia, but the schizoids, they just don't care. And it's kind of hard to date them, because they generally don't even care about sex. They don't even want to have sex. They're not they're not asexual in terms of like sexual orientation, but they're mistaken sometimes for asexuals, because they're just not interested. And well, what are they interested in? Well, they have little things here and there that kind of capture their attention, but they're just really characterized by a profound indifference to pretty much everything in life going on around them, which is sort of wild. And then for me, one of my favorite personality disorders, because I've had several of the traits over my lifetime, is the obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is not the same as OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder. But the obsessive compulsive personality disorder is that miserable dad who's like yelling at the kids to get in the car at dark 30 because our vacation is starting. I want to get to the hotel now. I don't want to waste any of our time. I want to check in as early as we
You've
can.
had some of that
I was that guy. I
because of the control issues.
I don't. Yeah, I think it was just my own history of being a control freak. But even when I went through the traits myself, it was, I would share with my family, what I had found, and they would laugh and say, "Yeah, that's who you are." But I didn't really meet the diagnostic threshold. You have to have a certain critical mass of traits.
So you're circling around it.
Yeah. And frankly, all of us have some of these traits at all times. I can be indifferent. I can be fearful of abandonment. I can be paranoid.
Yeah.
I can be antisocial.
Totally.
Yeah. So these are human traits. And so they're all appropriate at different times.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is when it's like 24/7.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So that's a real problem.
Yeah, because I see some myself in a lot of them as well. I think we had this conversation in a different podcast, and again, not to the point where it's all the time. So I think, but it is kind of when you start going through this, you're like, man, do I have a personality disorder? Do I have this or that?
Right. Right.
It
Yeah.
really makes you question, but like you said, it's all human things that we all experience as humans. It's like, so.
Yeah, and you think you would be able to. I think because the human animal is so familiar with the concept of personality. If you're a normal person worried about a personality disorder, then you probably don't have a personality disorder.
Okay. And then what's number 10 then?
Well, there is this other one that I do see. It's kind of it comes up, dependent personality disorder, and the dependent is reliant upon others for validation to make them feel good about themselves. And they're all about that all day long. So I think the stereotype would be and I hate to say this because I don't want to offend anybody who's religious, but the religious follower who is constantly volunteering and trying to get brownie points for all the things that they're doing, even when they don't want brownie points. They say they don't want brownie points. They do thrive on that affirmation they're getting from those they perceive as being higher up. And so maybe some of us might call them a bit of a brown noser or an ass kisser, but the dependent personality disorder doesn't necessarily, you could have somebody who doesn't believe in any religion and still have dependent personality disorder. It's just usually then their spouse or some other individual becomes everything to them. Okay.
And those are the 10 then. So paranoid, narcissism or narcissistic, borderline personality disorder, antisocial, avoidant, histrionic, schizotypal, schizoids, obsessive compulsive, independent.
Yes, you're taking notes on this. Are you like, okay, you're not thinking of dating all of them.
All of them, yes. That's one of my 30 dates I want to go on.
That would be an interesting book. Dating nothing but personality disorder dates for 3 years.
Yeah.
I think that would be kind of interesting. So
what about ADHD? Is that a personality disorder or
not at all?
Something
not
else?
At all. In fact, if anything, the rest of us could probably look at people with ADHD generally as having rather superior personalities. They tend to be absolutely wonderful people.
And what exactly is ADHD? Because it seems like something that is more prevalent now or more talked about now, or it just seems more around.
I think we're talking about it more partly because we're getting a little more educated about mental health conditions. So the analog would be, Benjamin Franklin is the inventor of the bifocal. And yet he was the only one wearing bifocals, right? Well, how many people in colonial times needed bifocal eyewear? A lot.
Probably a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many were ever diagnosed needing it? Very few.
Okay.
So with increased sophistication in the mental health care industry, we have more education, more teachers at schools identifying people with ADHD. And then we're hearing a lot about it, I think, in the news, partly because there's a lot of ongoing research. But I think lately I've noticed since the pandemic and the supply chain disruptions, a lot of people with ADHD are not able to access their medication. And not that medication works for everybody with ADHD, but for those who are using medication, it can be very helpful. And when they don't get their medication, life can become much more challenging.
And what is ADHD though? Like it's like adult deficit disorder, right? Or
attention
deficit, yeah.
Hyperactivity disorder.
Yeah.
So there are multiple types of ADHD, subtypes, and I think we're still at the very beginning of our understanding of this. And we call it a disorder, I think, mostly because we want to be able to make medication available. And also there's a history of ignorance regarding the condition, because actually it's just really, I don't really see it as an impairment. I think
so I could date someone with ADHD.
Absolutely. I think but it would depend on the individual and how they're dealing with their ADHD.
Is it again on a continuum, like you're saying?
Absolutely.
Mild to severe.
Absolutely. And there are people with, I just think it's a neuroatypical brain that the human race has relied upon for millennia to do a number of tasks like hunting. If I were to step out into a savanna on the plains of Africa with somebody with ADHD, I'm guessing that every single time they would be by far and away the better hunter.
So it's almost like an Asperger's autism spectrum sort of thing, maybe. No?
Almost, but different. Yeah, there's some overlap there, but there's also overlap with giftedness. So people with ADHD, I count many people with ADHD as my closest friends, and they are impulsive to the point where we remember back in grade school that one kid who was told, if you open your mouth one more time, you're going to the principal's office. And he couldn't resist the impulse to say the most hysterically funny thing that even had the teacher cracking up. Yeah. And yet he goes to the principal's office and he gets in trouble, but he's funny and he's enjoyable and he doesn't have a mean bone in his body. And so, some of these mental health conditions.
So that would be ADHD for him?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Okay. And I think it would just depend. I think their biggest kryptonite, frankly, is boredom. When they cannot handle boredom, whereas some neurotypical like myself, I can be bored all day long and I don't even notice it because it isn't painful in the least to me. So on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like 0.01, and I don't get bored.
So it's kind of like if you're bored by something, you could possibly have it. You're just like,
if you've experienced boredom is excruciatingly painful.
Yeah, I think I might have ADHD then.
Well, so glad you noticed that.
Oh, you noticed it?
Well, yeah. Heck yeah. I mean, but it's nothing. I thought you knew.
I don't know. And so there's too many things to know these days.
There's a lot to know, but it's a great brain. It has nothing to do with IQ. It has nothing to do with the ability to love. And it's just, they need stimulation. And when they do get bored, they experience it more like at a 7.
Yeah.
In terms of pain.
But can an ADHD person be like, there's a lot of boring stuff out there?
But not boring for me at that level. And I'm more typical and ADHD. If the majority of people were ADHD, I would be the one who they'd be putting on medication, right? Yeah. So because the world is built around my neurotypical brain. Okay. And those of us with neurotypical brains, we can spend all day doing boring tasks, and the engine of industry just chugs along.
I think I'm just having a revelation about why I hated working so much in my entire life, of all the menial jobs that I was forced to do to make money.
Well, and the world is full of these amazing, wonderful, creative types. Like I've always loved Clint Eastwood and his films, and he's ADHD, and so is Jamie Foxx, and so are lots of other amazing, wonderful people. So ADHD is, to me, not a disability or a liability. It's just what we all need to do is learn to work with our brains rather than to fight it and fight it and fight it and try to be like everyone else.
Yeah, I'm having like revelations here. Like even I was at the bank the other day and I was just sitting there like, how do people work at this place? Like, how does this even exist?
Let me out of here.
Let me out of here. I can't even, and I'm thinking that they're suffering. I was like, this person is just suffering. Oh, they're so, they just want to end their life. They're not happy. And it's like, I feel bad. So it's like, no, they like it. They don't feel that, I guess. I mean, some of them maybe do, but.
And that's one way they learn. This isn't for me.
Yeah.
So, people like yourself who are creators, I think being able to build a life where you're able to create is a huge part of making life work.
Yeah.
And for me, being creative is more of a intentional thing I have to lean into. It's a little harder for me, I think, than for someone like yourself.
Yeah. Interesting. See, I learned something. so hopefully,
I wish the audience could see the look on your face because I don't walk around in my life diagnosing people.
Yeah.
But you just had this today. You had this in this session. You had a insatiable curiosity in this podcast. You wanted to know all the personality disorders, and then you took the leap over to ADHD. We may need to edit the heck out of this session.
Well, I just want, Well, no, they need to hear this because maybe someone else is coming to some realizations. Okay, so back to personality disorders.
Sure.
So one thing I noticed with like the narcissism thing is that it gets a lot of play. I think out of all of the personality disorders, narcissism is like the topic. Like there's therapists out there who devote their lives to narcissism, and you hear a lot of times he's a narcissist, she's a narcissist. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Is narcissism like the most prevalent one, or are people like throwing that term around in a way that's being a little too loose with it?
I think we tend to be very sexist with a lot of our terminology when it comes to personality disorders. So we need to be a little careful, I think. Even clinicians, I think, need to be careful because typically I've read so many forensic reports on defendants in criminal cases where he was referred to routinely as antisocial personality disorder because he had no respect for agreements. He didn't honor society's expected norms. He had he took liberties with people's safety, including his own. But a lot of times those guys are just merely ADHD. It's just that they were impulsive and that had consequences. But it wasn't because they were criminally minded or trying to hurt anybody, but they get categorized this way. And the diagnostic threshold it's a really low bar on that. So, but I think it's greatly misused. With narcissists, of course, it's in the news because of politics lately, but I share a number of narcissistic traits. And I think all of us have at least some because we all should have some regard for our reputation. And it's just that with the narcissist, it's the event. It's the topic of the day every day is what are other people thinking about me?
Okay.
And so, to be concerned about it from time to time, I think is totally appropriate.
Does a narcissist want to make everyone like them too?
No, not necessarily. So if I were a gang leader, I might want everybody to fear me because my image is the thing I'm really focused on.
Yeah. What about someone who wants to make their image? They focus on their image, but they want to people to mirror their image. Like what I see in myself, I want everyone else around me to become.
Can you give me an example of what you're talking about?
Like Liberace. You ever see that?
He doesn't want everybody else to be Liberace, does he?
Didn't you see that move, the candelabra?
I did not see the movie.
Well, it's he essentially makes a young man turn into him, like through surgery.
Oh, I see what you're
It's
saying.
like making love to yourself.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Well, historically, from Greek mythology, Narcissus was the guy who was cursed by the gods into falling in love with the first person he saw in revenge for what had happened with, what was her name? Echo. And the first person he saw was his own image reflected in the pond.
Okay.
That he was seated next to. But it isn't really about self-love or excessive self-love. It's really about preoccupation with image.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not like I need to recreate people in my image. It's really more about my image mattering so much to me that it's my transcendent value. It matters. That's really my soul trait in my existence, or the primary trait that eclipses all others, maybe is a better way to say it.
Okay. And then what about as far as like therapists being trained in this stuff? Like, did you go to therapy school? I know that's not even the right way to say that, but
when I was in training
in grad school, not therapy school, did they go through this list of you and then talk to that, or like,
back in the day when I was in school, no, they didn't. And part of that time period was everybody was either covered by insurance or not. And insurance companies, typically by this time the 90s came around, nobody was covering personality disorders because it's expensive. Yeah. It's 3 to 5 years of multiple contacts weekly.
Yeah.
So it's not inexpensive. And most insurance policies are written with exceptions carved out for the treatment of personality disorders, which is a shame because they are so disabling.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like carving out any treatment of cancer because it's expensive. And it's, I would say personality disorders are about as expensive as treating cancer.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And when it's a serious case, at least it's about as expensive as treating cancer. But what a world of difference it makes in the lives of so many people. And I think in terms of having compassion on people, I think it should be covered. But because of what I said, most universities would maybe touch on personality disorders, paying lip service to the possibility, but disregarding the frequency of the occurrence and the severity of what it would mean. In fact, for many years, decades, actually, I've heard many students, when I've lectured at university, I've had students confront me with, well, yeah, but there's no science backing this, or there's, they're getting rid of this in the next DSM manual. And no, I've been here through multiple iterations of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And from the 3rd edition to the 4th edition to the 4th edition text revision to the 5th edition, the 5th edition text revision. And it just maintains, because it is a very easily diagnosed condition. It is a disabling condition, and it's a condition that's simple to treat, but it's difficult to treat because it requires persistence and patience. And a lot of people are just, I don't know, maybe intimidated by that scenario. Yeah. So if anybody listening sees one of their children they suspect may be having a problem like this, to mention it to a therapist who's comfortable with the topic. But we're not supposed to diagnose children with any of these disorders, with the exception of, borderline personality disorder. But getting treatment when we're younger is going to be way helpful, even if we're not capable of being diagnosed. And I think and also everybody should know, especially you, that it's very genetic. Genetically determined. So there's a high degree. We've taken a look at the twin studies coming out of Sweden, and 2 twins who were adopted by different families. And wow, you just see such a powerful indicator of generation after generation of the same disorder.
Interesting. And so then to wrap up, I'll ask you then, this is kind of a big question, but so say you are in a relationship with somebody who has, first, I guess we'll start with dating. What if you're dating somebody who you suspect has a personality disorder?
Well, it kind of depends. What if you have a personality disorder and their personality disorder kind of fits with yours? If I'm a narcissist or antisocial and she's a borderline, I get to exploit her fear of abandonment.
Does that work? Well, that's got to be something that happens a lot.
It happens all the time. There are whole families of people with personality disorders. And that's why I just think it's really important for people to be aware of what they're getting into and really to, like, none of us would knowingly sign up to get involved with somebody who had a meth addiction.
Yeah.
And personality disorders are also very disabling. And it makes it very difficult for the person without a personality disorder to have a happy life with this person as their partner. So it's not like we need to shun these people. It's not like we can't date them, but we should be looking and knowing what we're getting into if we choose to get involved. So
keep it in mind when you are dating and do your due diligence and your intentional interviews and have this knowledge aware going in and know what you're getting into.
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line, is doing your due diligence and knowing what you're getting into. And then, the ultimate remedy is, even if you do make a mistake, is divorce is still legal in the United States.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask that next. So say that's dating, but then now the relationship. So say you are now in a either serious relationship or a marriage with somebody who has this. So either you could break up if you're in a relationship or get a divorce. That's if it's horribly bad, but is it ever going to get better if the person doesn't get help?
Well, yeah, if you can wait 20 or 30 years, borderlines, for example, do seem to show some improvement in middle age. So there are people who kind of show improvement spontaneously without therapy. But you've got to be in it for the long haul to see that.
Yeah.
And more typically what happens is it just becomes, in all cases, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Let's go back to the paranoid. Because he's so suspicious of people taking advantage of him, plotting against him, talking about him, that suspicious nature tends to change his behavior to that of a suspicious person, an obviously suspicious person. Well, as a direct result of the change in his behavior, people do start talking about him when he's not in the room. And he walks into conversations and people give him a furtive look and change the subject of the weather. And I knew it. And these irrational beliefs, that everybody's plotting against me, when I experience the reality of it, it serves to reinforce my worldview that, I really am being talked about. I really can't trust people. And for the borderline, for example, because he or she is afraid of being abandoned, and they know with a certainty that they will be abandoned once the other person gets to know them, they live with this chronic fear. They express this fear repetitively over and over. And also one of the traits they have is inappropriate, intense anger and expressions of anger. And what a surprise. People often step away, get a divorce, or, get away from the relationship with their boyfriend, girlfriend. And so it validates what they knew all along was true. And until they start seeing the pattern, which is really hard. If you don't have a functional observing ego, it's really hard to see these patterns.
Yeah. Man. And are some people, though, find it difficult to leave people with personality disorders? Like,
sure, the dependent personality disorder finds it very difficult to leave. And sometimes so does the borderline personality disorder. I think especially with the really cruel antisocial who plays on those fears a lot.
Yeah. Man, there's so much you could get into here, but we are going to wrap it up. And we will end with a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, visit steveading.com and fill out the contact form. And this week's question is, my best friend is getting married and he's in a horrible relationship. I believe his girlfriend is an abuser and is pushing him into this. Am I obliged to be his best man? If I back out, then she has successfully alienated another person in his life. How can I finesse this?
Yeah. You know, he's not going to like what I'm going to say, because essentially the bottom line question there is, how can I control my friend from making this mistake? Well, I don't want to control him. I know I can hear the objections already, but how can I finesse this means, what can I do that will prevent what's going to happen from what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And you can't do anything.
Wow.
So you can say to your friend, hey, look, this is what I think, which is you risking your friendship, saying something he really doesn't want to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure our friendship is going to get sabotaged. And I really think you're making a mistake marrying this person. If knowing that you still want me to be your best man, I'm glad to be there for you. But I'll also be there for you when you file for divorce. So just know that, okay? And if your friend still will talk to you after you say all that, then great. But I don't think you'd want to necessarily preemptively just walk away. That's not much of a friend, right?
Yeah.
So I think it takes real guts as a friend to be a friend, and when your friend is in need of some truth telling.
Yeah. So you could just say that, but you can't say that over and over again.
No, because then you become a critic, a control freak. You're really trying to control him from making a mistake. And I think people benefit from being allowed to make their mistakes.
Yeah.
They really do. And just for all of us to just get out of the way and let them make the mistakes, and then live our lives joyfully and with a lot of love and peace, so that we are the example of what we wish for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I relate to this question because I have a friend
in that situation.
Not who's getting married. Hopefully he's not. But and I've had a conversation with him about it and said all I could about it, and there's nothing I could do. And it also felt good to just say it and be honest with him and then let it go. And then like releasing that control. And it's like, because I think it is worth, like, friends should say something, but then after you say it, you got to let it go and be there for him and say, hey man, good luck.
And that's the mic drop.
Yeah.
Because that it just doesn't get any more accurate or honest than that. That's exactly what we all need to do with our friends.
Yeah. And I love him, so I'll support him. So whatever he does. So if he wants to marry a psycho, then that's his business.
Absolutely. It really is.
Cool. All right. Well, great conversation. Thanks for the question. Thanks, Steve. And we'll catch you all next week.
I was just so happy I could diagnose you today too.
Oh yeah. Thanks.
We'll talk about that ADHD.
Okay. See you later.